my opinion. But you can't make oil down without meat. Some people do, and that's fine. But you must have some meat in there. Pigtail, chicken, a little salt beef, crab or wild meat like iguana, or even salt fish.
No. With the salt fish, you have to soak it good because you don't want to salt the pot. You must also try not to eat out all before you finish prep the other ingredients. That is problems.
Now, the saltfish, originally cod, was meant as a cheap source of food for the slaves. But today, saltfish is Mr. Saltfish. So put some respect on it.
Anyways, dumplings must not be forgotten. Very important. You see, making dumplings is an art. Can't be too hard or too soft, can't be too big or too small. It can't be too sweet or too salty. It must be just right. All you need is a little flour, salt, and water. That is how we like it. Now, to pack the pot. That is the real skill. You must artfully stack all these ingredients in your pot and cloak it in callaloo. Let it simmer slowly in a bath of coconut milk, turmeric, which was introduced to us by South Asian immigrants, curry and other seasonings. Boy, pure perfection.
At Independence time, you can find pots of oil dung smoldering on an open fireside in every community. Look out for the savory aroma and people lining by the pot with their bowlie, fig leaf, or plate, whichever is your choice.
This dish is Grenada's fingerprint. Each pot possesses its own unique flavor. You see oil dung? That's a Grenadian thing.
Good evening and welcome to the June 23rd edition of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Colin Dowe and I'll be guiding the discussions this evening. Thank you so very much, Dowe, for joining us. As I always begin the program with gratitude. Giving up part of your Monday night, whether you're looking at us on GBN television, tuned in GBN radio, or any of our social media platforms. Thank you for being part of this evening's discussion. I have a return guest with me this evening. It's the third anniversary of the election victory of the National Democratic Congress, and the Prime Minister and political leader of the National Democratic Congress is with us this evening. Prime Minister, welcome.
Thank you, Colin. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to say pleasant evening to your viewers as well.
Okay, excellent. Let's just jump right into it because, well, first of all, I'd probably say congratulations. It's 3 years in, and then the anniversary, there's cause for celebration. You look a little bit tired, and I know you had a cruise last night. Is it the cruise or is it the workload?
Maybe it's a combination of all. No, thank you for the expressions of congratulations, and it's really congratulations to the people of Grenada, not so much to me. I couldn't put myself in office. The people of Grenada chose to do so and to put the NDC administration in office, and we're humbled and very grateful for the opportunity to have served over the last 3 years, and we look forward obviously to serving for the next 2 years.
Okay, so it's 3 years in, and I'm assuming that the honeymoon is over. So share with us, how has the complexities of leadership been treating you?
I would say good. I think, it's obviously was a steep learning curve because I had no public policy making experience at all, and very limited political experience in terms of partisan politics. So obviously getting trust into office quickly probably had its advantages. The first one is that I think for me in particular, and I think honestly for this NDC administration government, we are focused on public policy that is long-term and as much as possible, as inclusive as possible, rather than perhaps a lot of the traditional politics which has been designed to be partisan and more insecure in the context of just thinking about how am I going to get back in office. So I think in that sense that's been an advantage. We don't have, I'm not carrying any baggage, frankly.
Right.
Second, I think it also meant that we brought some fresh perspectives to public policy making and decision making, part of which is swiftness of decision making, and then trying to implement as quickly as we can. No doubt, because the public sector is a different animal to the private sector, there are lots of constraints, and in some respects understandably so, because you're dealing with the public purse, and you need to have checks and balances to make sure that things don't run away. Right. But at the same time, I think we are quite focused on seeing how we can continue over time to make the system more efficient. And I think that's one of the things we are focused on, because we recognize that if the system is not efficient and you don't work on making the system efficient, then no amount of good intentions, no amount of good public policy is going to make a difference if you don't actually improve how things are done. So that is a medium to long-term approach. Okay. But I would say otherwise, it's been a good experience. Okay. I'm quite happy.
You know, I distinctly remember when we were having this conversation at the end of your first year, I asked what surprised you most about leadership, and you shared the celebrity status, you know, the lineup, the people who want to take pictures and everything else. You're in the middle of the term now, it's year 3.
Yes.
What has surprised you upon reflection?
It's still continuing. But that's a good thing, I suppose, because it could always go in the other direction very quickly. So it's still continuing. But I think the other surprise is the time has blown by. You know, it's 3 years already.
Right.
And it seemed only like yesterday. So that's obviously just the reality. I think the sheer velocity and the volume of the things the breadth and scope of the things you have to deal with. The challenge of our system of governance is that we have no local government. Right. So you are dealing with individual, personalized desires, demands, wishes.
So you're 2 tiers, because you MP and you're part of the executive.
Well, you MP, you're part of the executive, but it's not just a question of MP. I'm saying in most countries, you know, even with the MP status, you need to have at the local level an apparatus that can actually address the needs of the citizens. And some of those needs are localized, right, and even regionalized. So if you have a situation where you have a drain, for example, that's blocked, even if you bring it to the attention of your MP, the MP can't do anything about it if there is no state apparatus in place to actually unblock the drain, if there are no workers, you know, if there are no resources dedicated to that. So part of the challenge we have is a system of government where at the MP, or what I call local level, there is no such system in place. Right. So I think in terms of how we improve the governance structure and system and how we make government more responsive to our citizens, we definitely have to, I think, pursue in the medium term revamping the system of government to create at least some level of local government.
And within our constitution, it is spoken of for Carriacou, although it's not for the other constituencies, so that can be a step 1.
Yes, but I think there's actually local government legislation on the books. It's a question of reviewing it, making sure it's fit for purpose, and then I think actually implementing. So there are countries within the immediate region. St. Lucia, for example, has some elements of it. Trinidad and Tobago has some elements. Jamaica certainly has. So I think we have to look at whether or not it would make better sense for us to, in fact, pursue this as one reform that is necessary to make government more effective and more responsive to the needs of people, certainly at the local level.
Right. Let me go the flip, because that's one of the surprises, positively so. What do you say would be one of the challenges or frustrations of leadership as you reflect on the 3 years?
Well, I think the single biggest challenge still is the fact that the public service, the government structures are largely outdated. And have not undergone any significant reform to be right-sized and to be effective for a modern society. So a large part of the government is still largely archaic and paper-based, and I've obviously been talking about this. Right. A lot of the systems are excessively bureaucratic and serve no useful purpose. And so with that sort of large, sprawling nature, if we don't get a handle on this, then we will continue to be not as effective as we should be, and you will continue to have frustrations. And even from a career point of view, a lot of the talent will leave.
Correct.
Because it's not just about money. And it's not just about the benefits of employment. That is important. But people also want to feel that they are making a difference.
And doing meaningful work.
Yes, people want gratification. People want to see that their actions on a daily basis leads to something, to the improvement in something, to the changing of people's lives.
Right.
And if you're not getting that and you're talented, after a while you will leave. You'd either go into the private sector or migrate. But the truth is, we need talent in the public service, because if we don't have talent, at the end of the day, the private sector doesn't implement public policy.
Right.
And public policy is designed generally to address the overall needs of the citizens and to hopefully move the country into directions that are positive for the overall benefit of everyone, including the private sector. So there are things that only the public sector can do, and you need talented people to be able to do it.
Right. Just going back to something you said previously, because one of the things you recognize that, wow, time is passing quickly, it's year 3. I think you're on record saying when you're coming in, 2 terms.
Yes.
I'm also aware that recently prime ministers that said they're going to quit seem to be rethinking, meaning Prime Minister Motley is going to go again. I believe Prime Minister Skerrit is going to go again. Reflecting here, still 2 terms, or there's a succession plan actively in place to the end of the 2 terms? Because I'm assuming there will be 2 terms. So,
well, thank you for the assumption. I hope Grenada makes that assumption into reality. So, no, that is still my view of this. I think we should not make the mistake of assuming that Grenada doesn't have the talent. And we should also not make the mistake of thinking that individuals are greater than institutions in the context of building capacity. It's institutions and institutional framework that will sustain a country. An individual may be great, but like all things, you come to an end.
Right.
And I think even in a professional setting, you probably appreciate that even great leaders tend to do what they have to do early. And then after a while, it's a question of continuing to what I call small incremental.
The tweaking,
the improvements, right? So I think we have to recognize that one of the challenges I think small island developing states faces is what I call the freshness, the zeal and the zest of new leadership, and the fact that if you don't have a dynamic situation that creates that kind of change, you are likely to stagnate easily. And I think you could perhaps just look at what you're interested in and the things your children are interested in, and you quickly realize how dramatically the gap develops.
Oh, absolutely.
Overnight. And there are other reasons. I think if you look at the world today, I'll just segue a little. Most of the problems of the world today are caused by old men. Right? If you look at all of the geopolitical tensions that are taking place right now.
And it's rehashing old things.
It's rehashing old things, some of them centuries old. And old men sending young men to their death. So I think in Grenada, where the population is quite young, we have to not just talk about the empowering of young people to make sure that they can shape their future. We have to give them the opportunity to do so. So my position is still the same. As I said, I didn't get involved in politics with any particular baggage except the desire to serve the country. And I am under no illusion that the only place you can serve is that of the office of Prime Minister. There are lots of other things, not just Grenada, regionally, internationally, that certainly after having the office of Prime Minister, you have an opportunity to continue serving, perhaps even on a grander scale. I look at the continent of Africa. I look at the enormous work that still is required for the motherland to be strong. There are enormous opportunities there for Africa and its diaspora. So I'm not particularly hung up on holding the office of Prime Minister.
Okay, fair enough. Allow us to reflect on the work done over the last 3 years. And I believe it's important that we hold parties accountable. So you presented a manifesto.
Yes.
That was your transformation guide, as it were. And I've pulled about 10 to 12 things from that manifesto, and I'd just like you to respond to where you are. I found it quite interesting, so we'll start off with some easy ones, I guess. So, the twice monthly salaries.
I think the response is check.
Check. Have we seen an increase in spend and also business activity? Because I think part of the rationale of implementing this was to ensure there's increased cash flow throughout the economy. Any evidence to support that has occurred?
I certainly think so. I would have to, that's my anecdotal sense. We certainly can ask the Ministry of Finance and I think the banking and finance sector for their feedback on this, so that we don't necessarily have to give what someone may say is biased perspective. But I certainly sense that in terms of when I look around the country and what's happening, and part of it was designed to at least assist people with their cash flow management, and I certainly think that has happened.
Okay. National minimum wage.
Check.
Good. What has been the impact of this in your belief? And I'm going from which sectors saw the greatest adjustments?
I mean, I think the impact has been enormous. We could just take the public sector itself. A lot of persons working in the public sector, believe it or not, were working for very, very poor salaries. Or cooks in all of our schools were making $700 and $800. They've gone up to $1,200.
Right.
A lot of the ancillary support staff in places like the health sector, again, people who are cooks who probably do a lot of the housekeeping and security type support work, which is vital. They saw an increase. All of a significant portion of the persons who were called Imanis, who were actually workers, were all earning under $1,200.
Right.
There might have been an exceptional one or two here who were above. So they also saw a significant increase. And sometimes you see things on paper, but you kind of have to meet the individual who's experiencing this. And I give the story. I was at the Sugar and Spice ice cream shop in Grenada, and I just happened to walk in, and there were two young ladies there. They offered me an ice cream, and then they started talking, and it turned out they were Imani teachers.
Okay.
And to be honest, I think it might be the first time I was actually meeting an Imani teacher, so I really had a conversation to explore what this concept meant.
Right.
Because in my time you had teachers, period. And they explained it, and then they told me that they had been in this position for almost 5-6 years, and they were making $800. And then their rent is virtually $800. So it told you the significant challenge that they were facing over the number of years. And obviously, I certainly wish the economy and the government fiscal revenues could allow us to bump it up. But if you go from $800 to $1,200, I mean, that's
50% increase straight off
the bat. So that has been, I think, significant for many persons. Up to last Friday, I was in a community meeting in Old Westall, and one of the persons who took the mic expressed her gratitude for this. She being a cook for perhaps as much as 15 years in a secondary school, and would have seen a significant increase as a result. So there's no question that many persons have benefited. In some instances, what we simply did as well was to simply move the rate to reflect the reality on the ground, because there were in some cases where the reality on the ground had improved, and so we wanted to make sure that legally someone couldn't say, well, I can go back, because the minimum wage didn't say so. Even security guards and so on would have been again impacted. So that, I think, has been of significant
Did
help.
you see or hear any complaints from businesses? Because part of the fare would be once you move the minimum wage, the cost of doing business has increased. So have there been any complaints from the businesses, one, or two, from workers who saying that I've been laid off by virtue of this?
I've not heard so, and I think one of the reasons for that, credit to the Wage Advisory Committee and the Minimum Wage Committee that was put together by the Honorable Attorney General and Minister for Legal Affairs, is that significant consultations were done with stakeholders and the business community prior to the enactment of the minimum wage. In fact, in the what I would call nearshoring sector, which is the call centers and so on, it was agreed actually to stagger the increase. Based on input that they had given in terms of the impact on their sector, and giving them the opportunity to be able to for cash flow and respond and grow. So I think that model certainly worked well. Obviously, in the immediate implementation, there would have been kinks and things that needed to work out, had to be worked out, clarity on some issues. So, for example, particularly in the agriculture wage labor sector, obviously you have this challenge where the tradition has been that people tend to work for 3 or 4 hours. They may work from 7 to 11 or sometimes 8 to 12 or even less. And the question arose as to whether in those circumstances they should be earning $1,200 per month. And obviously we said no. The $1,200 per month is almost an assumption that you're doing a full day space. So in circumstances where you are essentially working 3 hours or so, then $1,200 per month would not be applicable. What would obviously be applicable is either the hourly rate or the daily rate as agreed for that time period. So you'd have had some of those situations. You probably do have one or two instances of domestics or cleaners as well, who similarly do what I call task work.
Right.
But essentially you come and you clean a house. I mean, whether you take an hour or 2 hours is largely dependent on your efficiencies, and not necessarily in those circumstances would you then benefit from that. So there has been some of these issues, and clarity would have been sought through the Ministry of Labour by persons who would have been impacted, both businesses and individuals.
Will we see, because there are some people who believe that a minimum wage should be a living wage regardless of sector, but our minimum wage still speaks to sector. You mentioned like the agriculture sector, the domestic sector, etc. Is our framework as such for us to have a minimum living wage across the board, which might be an hourly rate, or do we still have to maintain the tier system which exists now?
Well, I think one of the things the Minister of Labour is seeking to ensure happens, unlike what happened in the past, is that the minimum wage adjustments could be looked at. I think the law actually requires, I think, every 3 years or so.
Okay.
For us to, in a sense, be more vigilant and more current with our review and changes on it. Whether that would get to the point of having a, as you call a living wage, I can't say, simply because some of the cultural nuances in some sectors are so entrenched that it may be quite difficult to break this in the medium to short term. But I mean, obviously, you also want to create flexibility in the labor market, particularly because we also have some challenges with the availability of labor.
Right.
And particularly, well, I can't even say skilled labor alone. Sometimes it's just labor, period. Even in the agriculture sector, as you can see, we're significantly challenged in the construction sector. There's significant shortage as well, made worse by Hurricane Beryl. So we have to create flexibility where persons can also, in a sense, supply the labor on terms and conditions that is negotiated by the market,
right.
Rather than always, in a sense, the government over-regulating. So that is also something we have to bear in mind.
Okay. Something else, free universal education up to the community college level.
Well, tick. Both TAMCC and ULO, as you're aware, we've implemented free tuition all the way up.
Have we seen increased enrollment? In other words, it's available, but
absolutely, both NULO and TAMCC almost immediately right off the bat, once the announcement was made, there was in some cases, I think even particularly in NULO, significant increase in the numbers.
How have the institutions responded to this challenge?
No, I think positively. For example, in the case of NULO, not only did we give the free tuition, but we actually increased the subvention to NULO, because they obviously indicated that in light of the increased enrollment in numbers, that they needed additional support to be able to respond adequately to the increases. So that has been significant as well.
Are these institutions fit for purpose, or do they need some revamping?
Well, first, we have to appreciate NULO is not the government.
Correct.
It is, and I want to again place on record my appreciation for the churches who've largely, who are responsible for the creation and the running and management of NULO, and to a large extent did it for decades with very little government support. Right. It's only in more recent time the government has stepped in by providing subventions to assist with wages and so on. So I certainly think the board and the management of NULO are constantly reviewing their curricula, the content, their fit for purpose, introducing new subjects. So, for example, I know in a sense ICT has become part of their curricula in terms of recognizing the need to respond. As you are aware, the hospitality has been a significant part of what they do as well, given the needs in the sector, refrigeration, plumbing, particularly air-conditioned refrigeration. If you didn't have NULO, this sector almost would not be able to supply. We would almost not be supplying labor and employees in that skill. So I think NULO has made a significant contribution to the provision of significantly skilled employees in Grenada, and they should be commended, but I'm sure the reviews will continue. TAMCC, I think a lot of work has to be done. There's no question. A new principal is in place, and I expect him and the team will begin to start addressing that in conjunction with the Ministry of Education. The Maribo Farm School, which falls under the auspices of NULO, is virtually being closed. That is something that we are absolutely keen to get going in the shortest possible time. The Minister of Education and his team and the Cabinet has approved that center as a center of excellence. Right. And we want to be able to work, obviously, with TAMCC to make that a reality. As recently as, I think, on my DM PMs with PMs, sure. Some of the young men at TAMCC were talking about, particularly in the automobile sector. They need to have better tools, better skills, the fact that you're dealing with hybrid and electric vehicles, and so on. So I think certainly there will be a recognition at TAMCC that there are some significant changes that needs to be made, an improvement. My son is there. I wouldn't say what he says, other than to say there's no question that we have to do a lot more to make TAMCC the center of excellence that it rightfully should be, because really it should be the center that creates the future leadership of Grenada, and we have to make sure that future leadership is placed, frankly, at the bleeding edge, not just the cutting edge of where the country needs to go. But I've had some engagement with the principal. I feel fairly confident he understands, and that he and his team will have already begun to take some of the steps to get us in the right direction. But I think we need to make sure that we don't take a laid-back approach to TAMCC. Because it is really, in my view, the central nervous system towards what future leadership in Grenada should be like. And if we don't put the resources in, if we don't pay attention to it, then we run the risk of that not taking place.
I'm happy as one consumer you express your wishes, so this consumer will not share any, but the implications are the same in terms of my own interpretation and the things that I've heard. One child per household with a sponsored first degree was something in the manifesto.
Yes.
The question is, what is your strategy to address this?
Well, I think a number of things, because we recognize that university education is not inexpensive. And so a couple of things. One, the Ministry of Education has been tasked, a cabinet subcommittee, with reviewing the government's entire scholarship policy. And we expect that will be presented certainly over the summer, leading into September. And the goal here is obviously to make sure that we can meet this mandate. So while this is happening, we are certainly looking at the possibility of how we finance this and how we can come up with creative ways to make sure that we have sufficient budgetary allocations to support this. Second, we are expanding our collaboration with universities who wish to partner with us to ensure that Grenadians can get into universities. So for example, the Monroe initiative that we recently embarked upon is one such initiative. We are pursuing, with all of our bilateral relations from China to Morocco to Venezuela to Cuba, expansion of the availability of scholarships for students at the university level. Obviously, there's St. George's University, there's the University of the West Indies. We have to relook, I think, and to some extent reinvigorate, particularly with the University of the West Indies, our approach to ensuring that Grenadians can pursue their first degree options within the region for obvious reasons. It's our university. So that is part of what we
But let me just before you move on here, pursue their education within the region.
Yes.
Why not at home?
No, absolutely at home.
89 acres in Hope had been going a begging. I am going to raise it.
You know, I was coming down in the vehicle and I was like, I wonder if he's going to let this issue go.
No, I will not let it go, and multiple reasons.
No, it's
I honestly believe that Hope in St. Andrew and Northern St. David ought to look like True Blue.
Yes.
And I've also seen the significant impacts that the Five Islands campus, University of the West Indies, has had in Antigua. Yeah. And hence, it's a bee in my bonnet. I'll accept that.
Yeah. So the University of the West Indies has proposed a concept. They have asked for permission to use the property to secure financing, which they have said, if secured, would also give them a better opportunity to be able to deliver on what was originally intended. The overall concept they've suggested is that of, I would use the word, a sports university. It is something that the cabinet has not said yea or nay to. It requires, I think, some deeper reflection and consultation, I think, with our stakeholders here. But there is no question that the asset, we don't have large contiguous parcels of land in Grenada, and it's vital, particularly as we look to see how we can, I would say, kickstart and revive the rural economy, particularly in St. Andrew, St. Patrick, that we obviously give mature and sober consideration to what should have happened and has not happened, and the likelihood of what this is going to happen is going to happen.
How has government gone about identifying your priority areas and therefore linking, let's say, scholarships and these bilateral agreements that you spoke of to what you see as your sustainable development strategy?
That is the reason for the cabinet subcommittee review.
Okay.
Because we recognize that if we prioritize healthcare, for example, if we don't have a scholarship, particularly a first degree policy that matches that, then we're saying one thing, and then the policy is going in another direction. And that's precisely why, because what has been left to happen is that essentially we have a reactive policy. Somebody comes and says, I want a scholarship, and they say, this is what I want to study. Well, my view is, if you're asking me to give you a scholarship, which means the taxpayers are paying for it, then it's not a one-way street where you come and say, this is what I want. It's a question of, what does the country want? What assuming you get the scholarship, what career are you more likely to succeed at, given the current needs and the future needs of the country? So we really want to make sure that we can, if you're paying for your own education, absolutely fine, you can study anything you want.
Right.
But if you're asking taxpayers to fund it, then I think the taxpayers, via the policymakers who they've elected into office, ought to have some say as to the areas where scholarships, whether it's free or partial, would benefit, and ensure that it's aligned to the needs of the country. So I can certainly say, for example, there's no question that I expect that when the recommendations come, that you would see, I would see a significant focus on areas like healthcare, the marine sector, tourism, because of its importance, agriculture because of the key need for security, engineering, digital skills. And I would say general construction skills because of the challenges we have. I'm just speaking for 5 years.
Anything you envision the creative economy, noting that has been a thrust recently?
Absolutely as well. I think the creative economy, digital technology, and technologies in general. But we also, at a fundamental level, foundational level, we need to produce scientists. Right. We need to produce, and that starts with revamping the education system and the focus on math and science and observation and critical thinking and soft skills. If we don't do those things at primary school, it becomes almost impossible to produce scientists, because if once people are scared of math, then it means you are scared of empirical data, and if you can't frankly engage in basic things like measurement, observation, critical thinking, experimentation, then essentially you can't produce engineers either.
Right.
So we have to do both at the foundational level. We have to address those things in the medium to long run. So it means, for example, and we know that in primary school we have teachers who are teaching math who themselves never got math.
Right.
So
and we're still looking at a 37 to 42% range in terms of the pass rate.
Yeah, so we have to get to the point where, at the primary school level, frankly, it's experts who are teaching math. Because if they get the foundation, the kids will soar quite easily by the time they get to secondary school. So those are some of the areas that we need to revamp. And you see why the vicious cycle continues. Because if I didn't get it, and I'm not being asked to go back and teach it, then I'm teaching that which I'm not certified to teach. And therefore, my own attitude to it will probably be one of insecurity, perhaps one of fear. That then breeds a negative attitude in terms of how I convey to the student. The student becomes disinterested. The student then doesn't get math either. So the cycle just goes on and on and on. So this is part of what, these are some of the challenges that foundationally we need to do as well, to make sure that at the secondary and tertiary level, we get the outcomes we desire in terms of the scholarship areas that we want to focus on for the development of the country. And I'll give you simple examples. I think and you see, this is why we think things are not important than they are. Let's take nursing, for example. You have to have math if you wish to pursue nursing.
Correct.
So you see immediately why we end up with a shortage of nurses, because we have a significantly low pass grades in math, and for obvious reason. You're dealing with medicine, you're dealing with prescription, you're dealing with measurements, etc. So this is the kind of challenges that we face. You see why we'd have shortages of skilled workmen. Because if you can't pass math, then you probably can't measure, you can't, so a lot of the empirical skills that you need to just function basically in the world, we'd end up producing not sufficient persons with them, because at the foundational level, some of the things we need to address would not have been addressed over the last couple of decades, really. So these are some of the issues we have to tackle.
Standardized price for petroleum products across the state of Grenada.
Check.
All right, I'm going to move on that one. One of the interesting things that was stated was 2 Senate seats being reserved for young people. I know you yourself were young, but
Check.
Check. Okay. Has the impetus for this initiative been realized?
I think yes, and we'll go further. I think it's important for us to emphasize to young people that the government is a young government, and I mean no disrespect, obviously, to my erstwhile senior colleagues in cabinet. Minister Andrews, Minister Gloria Thomas, Minister Dennis Cornwall. I don't know if Minister Adrian Thomas will accept that title.
No, I think he will want to join with the young government.
Or the Forest Minister, Honorable Joseph Handel. But I suppose Honorable Philip Tillerson will probably say he's straddling both sides of the fence. I don't know where I fall in there. But we have a young government. We have a youthful government. You have 3 MPs that were elected by their respective constituents, the Honorable Ron Redhead, the Honorable Tevin Andrew, and the Honorable Kieran James, who were all
below 30.
Below 30. I'm not that old either. Andy Williams is not that old either, and I think it's important for us to emphasize that. So not just at the senatorial level, where you have Senators Britton and Senator Civil, we also have MPs who are young, and I think it's important, therefore, for us to appreciate that when we talk about empowering young people, that we mean that, and that you have young people at the most senior level of leadership within the country.
Okay. One of the things that you spoke of in terms of empowerment was the giving of your MPs or your ministers experience.
Yes.
And one of the ways of doing that would be cabinet reorganizations. Will we be seeing a cabinet reshuffle coming anytime soon, or are you comfortable with how the team is working?
Are we comfortable? I don't envisage any cabinet submission anytime soon, but obviously part of being life is being flexible and nimble. But at this stage, that's not on the cards.
All right, so flexible and nimble. You made some major adjustments a year ago. And with that came the exit of now former Senator Lacrette.
Yes.
He was in the media this weekend saying that he was victimized almost for bringing what he perceived to be corrupt practices to cabinet. How do you respond to that?
Well, I didn't hear him saying that, but I'd find that bemusing.
We actually do have a clip if you would like to hear.
But my position will still remain the same. That would be quite bemusing.
It would be quite bemusing.
Yes.
All right.
And victimized by whom? Me, because I am the one who terminated his cabinet appointment. So
right.
I can assure you there was no victimization.
All right. The comment made was losing trust and confidence.
Yes.
And essentially what he said by that statement, his credibility was undermined, his employability would have been eroded in moving forward. And you ought to have known that this would have been a natural effect of the statements made.
No, but I think obviously you serve in the cabinet at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So if the Prime Minister makes a determination based on a number of factors that he no longer has confidence in you, I can't lie about that, and that's the fact, and that's the natural consequence. If someone is in any kind of contractual or employer-employee relationship, and this is not an employer-employee relationship, but obviously it's a relationship in the context of governance, and someone loses confidence in someone else, and obviously I can't just simply say to the public, he's no longer a member of the cabinet and don't ask me. Right? I chose not to get into the details of it for actually more the sake of the regard, despite this issue that I have for then Senator. And that's still a position, which is why I have not gotten into it. I think someone had asked me, and I'd answered in the affirmative. You have to appreciate something. We have to understand what public policy is, we have to understand what governance is, and we have to understand what politics is. Being terminated from the cabinet is a completely separate and distinct act than, for example, being thrown out of a party. Right? Senator Lacrette chose to resign from the National Democratic Congress. No one forced him out, no one asked him to leave. Right? And there was no pact, nor can there be, of any agreement that says, for example, merely because you run, even if you win your seat, that you will sit in the cabinet. The Honourable MP for St. George Northwest, Ron Redhead, doesn't sit in the cabinet. He's an MP. Those things happen. right? So we have to understand that, and I think sometimes we perhaps don't spend enough time studying the history of institutions, public policy, governance, right? In large countries, Canada, United Kingdom, is a fraction of MPs who sit in cabinet. The vast majority of the MPs remain MPs and lobby on behalf of their constituents and lobby their colleague ministers to be able to pass national policy that impacts that. If you, as we have a bicameral legislature which has an upper house and a lower house, if you are fortunate enough to have not won your seat and you're given a senatorial appointment, you could be given simplicity a senatorial appointment with no ministerial portfolio, or you could be given a senatorial appointment with ministerial portfolio. And if you're given ministerial portfolio, you could be relieved of the ministerial portfolio at any time, and you could remain a senator. Or you could be terminated of both. So the permutations are endless.
Okay.
So I just want to conclude. I think anyone who enters governance and public policy ought to appreciate the consequences of what you're getting involved in. So I don't think this has anything to do in terms of his employability or any of those kinds of issues. Because had he remained a member of the organization and continued to show his desire to serve the public, I'm sure there would have been countless opportunities for employability if you were so interested.
Okay. Did the loss of trust and confidence surround anything to do with the National Lottery Authority?
No.
It did not?
No.
Okay. All right. It is time for us to take our first break. So viewers and listeners, we'll take our first break and we'll be right back. We do have our Prime Minister with us and we'll be delving more into those campaign promises and how many he'll be saying, check, next stop. We'll be right back.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue. Available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
Mobility, a common theme woven into the very fabric of human history. From ancient wanderers to modern explorers, our instinct to move, to seek something greater, and to grow has always driven us forward. Imagine a journey into pathways of boundless opportunities and endless possibilities. A collective future where the vibrant rhythms of the Caribbean, rich culture, and welcoming community create unforgettable experiences. Beyond citizenship by investment, we believe in our collective investment of time, resources, and energy that fosters innovation, creates jobs, and enriches lives, driving the growth of an entire nation. The Investment Migration Agency Grenada boasts over a decade of exceptional service and remains committed to guiding you toward global mobility and economic freedom through investment. Your journey becomes our shared story of progress and prosperity. This is an invitation to be part of something greater, something enduring. Begin your journey at imagrenada.gd. IMA Grenada. Unlock the possibilities.
Whether you're refreshing a bedroom or giving your home a bold new look, the Color Shop has the perfect paint and tools to make it happen, inside and out. With quality finishes for every surface and accessories to match, we make painting easy from start to finish. Whether it's a DIY weekend or a contractor starting a brand new project, the Color Shop is the trusted choice.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. We have with us this evening Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, and we're doing some reflections on the 3 years in office. Prime Minister, pensions and gratuity according to the Constitution. That was one of the announcements.
Check.
Let me just ask, because it was done.
Yes.
And there were lots of naysayers. In doing it, has the Consolidated Fund experience any challenges liquidity in terms of your recurrent expenses?
No. You see, and I think this is important for the public to see, when we announced that we were going to pay the pension, we already knew the facts. We already knew that there was, in fact, work being done by the International Monetary Fund in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance at pension reform and to address this issue. The then Minister of Finance knew fully well, he wasn't Minister of Finance, it was Gregory Bowen, but the then Prime Minister knew fully well that the pensions could be paid. So this was not about paying the pension. This was about command and control. This is about the fact that as long as I have the ability to say no, or to say I'll give you a little bit there, a little bit there, you'll constantly be coming, or you'll be intimidated by me, or you'll be afraid of me, or you'll not take me on. So this was not a case of about wanting to actually address the genuine poverty that people will be retiring into. And that's the reality. Recall post the change in government, there were comments about they left a pregnant treasury and they left so much money in the treasury, so what, you're supposed to impoverish the population while the money just sits in the treasury? So that is the sort of thing. So this wasn't, and if you recall the then hula bahu about this big national address, and which was just basically to speak doomsday and to rough people up and to, the country will mash up if you pay this thing and so on. This was all another ruse to basically get the public servants to back along from fighting for basic decency in the context of what happened. So, the fact is, yes, there would be, I think, in the context of the sheer size of the public service today, it would be in the long run unsustainable to maintain that type of pension, which is an unfunded pension paid for by the taxes, and it will also make it very risky for the retirees in years to come, because what you don't want is a notion where you have a pension on paper. But when you're looking for the money, you're depending on the taxpayers. If the country goes through a rough time, for example, there is no fund that you can look to. So hence the reason for the reform to say, as we go forward, and as we take on new employees, for example, or people who have been regularized, post the date of the new Pension Act, that we will then have a funded pension where the government is actually going to segregate the money out and pay its contribution. You're going to pay a contribution. This is going to be managed by a board of trustees and regulated by GAFIN.
And that was my next question. Where are we with this contributory?
No, it's taking place.
Okay.
We are at the point where we have to have the board of directors and the investment firm and the administrator appointed. So we're going through the process. We would have done the request for proposals. The team would have been interviewing fund managers and administrators and so on. But in the meantime, the deductions are being made and held in a segregated account, so that once the fund managers, the administrators, the board of trustees is put in place, they will then take over. We had committed, obviously, to pay the cost of administering the fund.
Right.
I think in the first year or two.
I heard 3, so
don't hold me to it, but certainly we've committed to pay it in the initial rounds, obviously, because the fund itself would not have accumulated any interest on the fund itself, simply because we now started that process. But it's on the way.
Has there been any buy-in from the private sector and or statutory bodies?
Yes, some statutory bodies have actually, I think even would have passed an SRO to already name, I can't recall the names of them, but some of the statutory bodies who currently don't have any pension funds, pension plans in place for them to come on, and we've had inquiries from the private sector about it. The goal ultimately is to actually make this as large a pension plan as possible, because obviously the advantage of pension is numbers, and particularly for smaller businesses which otherwise may not be able to sustain the administrative cost of a pension. This is the perfect opportunity for them to do so, because the cost obviously is spread amongst all of the employers and employees who are part of the fund, and that would make it a lot easier for smaller private sector companies who are looking to find a pension, retirement, savings fund for their employees to be able to join the fund.
Okay. Another one, the School for the Performing Arts, return of the National Arts Festival, but let's just embrace culture.
Yes.
I know that there's been establishment of the Office of Creative Affairs, and basically any highlights that you would like to mention in that thrust.
Well, I mean, obviously the Office of Creative Affairs has been established, and they've already commenced a number of initiatives, including making grant funding available for the creatives. That has been supported by our fiscal policy, which zero-rated VAT on inputs that the creatives use, from cameras to paint brushes, to musical instruments, to computer equipment. That is ongoing. We've been collaborating with the T. Marshall Community College to start teaching of courses related to intellectual property and the creatives as well. We had the significant seminar that was held on Leash to essentially galvanize awareness around this space. So there are a number of those initiatives that we've started. I think the critical thing is we have to make sure that people can distinguish between what I call the performing arts and music and so on for the sake of it, for amateur interest, to a situation where we actually professionalize and monetize people's creativity. And that is critical, but that requires the legislative support. It requires the financial institutions to understand that sector, because that's one of the major challenges. And we've had some engagements already in just trying to explain to the banks, what are royalties? How does a musician make money? How does a painter make money? And how can you value their work so that you could actually
But
support.
where are we with this? Because we heard an announcement a couple of months ago that Vaughan essentially has been named as the face of copyright.
Yes.
But we really don't have any honoring.
No.
in Grenada.
I think no. This is beginning to change, and I think it starts with small steps. And I'll go back to actually even the way we managed our campaign, right? Save for I think the youth event involved, we had no foreign acts performed. Contrary to what is sometimes suggested, we paid many of the acts who performed and who sang songs in support of our campaign. We paid them. And I recall myself and Ambassador Romain, who obviously is instrumental in leading this, having a discussion where even I was suggesting these fees look high. And he said to me, are you prepared to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to supporting the creatives? And the argument ended because he was right. Right? And I say this to say, even last night on my cruise, it was local acts. I didn't ask for no favor. I didn't say, give me a blight. I said what their fee is, and we paid them. And I'm saying this because if you look at despite all of the hula bahu that was made the first year about Carnival, and the following year, the prize monies went up significantly for artists. So I think from a financial point of view, I've been talking about the need for our promoters to pay our local acts much better, because you see the enormous disparity between regional acts. I'm not even saying international, the acts from Jamaica and so on, and Trinidad, and the acts they bring, and our act, especially at Carnival time. When let's be real, people are not coming out because you're bringing some Jamaican artists. They're coming out because it is Carnival time, and we have even at the cabinet level floated the idea of whether we should have a minimum wage for the creative sector. Because that's a sector that at this point in time is not in the minimum wage order. Right. So we are serious about pursuing this. But it's important for the creatives themselves to understand the financing and the monetizing of the creative industry, right? And that requires, first of all, education and awareness, and then we need to be able to put the legislative framework in place. So the Minister for Legal Affairs, the Attorney General, has been working quite a lot with WIPO, which is partly why the Vaughan ambassadorship come about, so that we can start building the awareness. And then over time, in the medium term, be able to create the legislation.
It means our media houses, our restaurants, and so that will use the work produced by those should pay.
Absolutely. But it requires them to understand that. It requires the education, because the same way in which you can't just go into a restaurant and say, I want the food for free, is the same way, you can't just use people's music and expect that they don't benefit from it, because they have created it. They've put time, effort, you have to go to studio, you have to pay, and it's everything. Paintings, drawings, graphic work, So over time, what we expect is that the population will be educated to understand that is how the creatives make their money. This is their intellectual property, and they have to be respected for it.
A center to perform.
Yes.
There have been lots of talk in the past about a cultural center in Simone, etc. Is this on the horizon?
Well, the Simone Cultural Center is being built. Again, it is something we inherited, and sometimes the challenge with hardcore infrastructure is difficult to just stop it, right? It is not an indoor facility. It will still be an outdoor facility, but we're committed to making it happen, because when we got there, it was already too late. It was rushed. I think that's part of the, wanting to show something is happening before the election, and so we are committed to seeing it through. There has been some redesign. It is what it is, right? There is no, at this point in time, any immediate plans for an indoor performing arts facility. I think that still has to be looked at in the next round, if I may put it this way. But certainly we do think it's important for things like the Festival of the Arts and those things to come back. We are committed to making sure that particularly the primary and secondary school at Steel Pan becomes commonplace at the school level and also in the community. So for example, in St. David's, we've been working to bring back the Corinthians Steel Orchestra. The pans were just sitting there, rusting on the current community center. We've taken them. A community group has been formed. I recently supported them with the purchase of a drum set. They are redoing all of the pans. We are working with the Minister of Culture to get a pan tuner to come up, and we will expect ripple effects throughout the island in terms of supporting some of these initiatives. In music, we are working with our communities. The Minister for Education, for example, has been supporting a music school in St. Andrew to start up. We are committed. We've met with all of the musicians in St. David. We actually have plans in place this year to retrofit one of the wooden buildings that was temporarily built to house the St. David's primary school, to turn that into a music room. And we're working with the Chinese embassy here to get funding to buy the musical instruments so that we can then have a proper music school. We have, the likes of teacher Lloydie and teacher Eddie and other folks who are prepared to come in and teach and so on. So we really see music as a vital part of Grenadians are actually, I think, talented. I heard a young lady singing at church yesterday. I was blown away by her voice. So we have to nurture that talent. It's a good way also of combating the challenges of mental health, the risk posed by alcohol, gambling, drug abuse, to make sure particularly our young men have wholesome activities that they can turn to. So this is a sector that I think is critical for us. I would still say it's in the embryonic infancy stage as we begin to go about it, but you would expect, I think, to see greater emphasis as part also of our educational trust to diversify the education sector and to make those things almost mandatory, so that persons who have the talent don't feel this is only about books and academics, and they're not giving us an opportunity to pursue some of the talents that we have.
Okay. 500 Grenadian-style homes for low and medium income families.
Right. So I will say check, but I obviously would have to give a narrative about this, because house building and infrastructure is not as simple as some of the other issues we've had to deal with. As you're aware, we have the pilot going on in Dunfermline. 17 homes are under construction. I met with the project sponsor. We've created a delivery team to help accelerate delivery on some of the things that are critical for us. We are hoping that the homes will be finished in June, but with construction, how these things go, we're told that the delays, we should expect some delays, although I will admit that's not the news I wanted to hear. But the idea here is that after we complete these 17 model homes, we will get a sense of what they cost. Okay. We will also get a sense of how quickly they were built compared to what we may say would be the traditional Grenadian building methods and technologies. So part of the idea of doing the pilot was to see whether using more modern types of materials and construction methodologies would reduce the time it takes to construct the homes and reduce the cost, right? But we don't want to assume so, because people always tell you things on paper, and then in practice you find that it may not.
Is it a say that we have different people working on these model homes, and are the homes different in terms of style?
Yes, so the homes are named after popular Grenadian spices and fruits. So you have sapodilla, I think you have soursop, that sort of thing. So you have different styles. Some are 3 bedrooms, some are 2 bedrooms, some are the technology for construction is in some cases are different. So yes, so the whole idea here was that I think you'd have 5 or 6 different models. They're on the Grenada Housing Authority website. If you go Project 500, you click on them and you'd see the artist impression or architectural designs of what the homes look like. So the idea would also be to get feedback from the public as to which ones are aesthetically pleasing to the public, because people have a certain sense of taste. So in a sense, it's also a part to get feedback, so that if we did 7 types and these 4 are the most popular, then the whole idea is going forward, and assuming they're also the cheapest,
yes,
and the quickest to build. The idea here is that we would then look to promote and push these 4. So we need to get the costings, because we don't want to embark upon a process where the goal, which is to get cheaper, more affordable, and faster built homes, is not accomplished. And obviously, you have to test things before you go to market with it.
So that's Dunfermline.
Yes.
Carriacou is decimated, of course, by Beryl.
Yes.
Are we going to see a pilot project there, whether it's in Dumfries or some other place, or Carriacou would still be on hold?
We have a pilot going on right now in Carriacou. We've actually imported prefab homes called Happy Homes in Carriacou, again, to test whether or not. So essentially, all that has to happen is the foundations are built and the homes are then erected on the foundation. So we know the cost of the homes, because obviously we've paid for it and had to import it and bring it. We are getting the costings from what the foundations involve, and then we're obviously putting those 2 together. Now, that's just the costings of the homes. Similarly for Dunfermline, we're not talking land cost yet and infrastructure cost. But again, that gives us the opportunity to determine whether or not, when we compare these prefab models with, say, the Project 500, which is cheaper, which is faster. Obviously, we also have to pay attention to how the economy works, because when you import a prefab home, you essentially are bringing in everything, right? So there's no money circulating, so to speak, at a Hubbard's or Purcell or Ramdani, and we have to be mindful of that. So part of it is also factoring, from a economic standpoint, not just the raw cost of the home. What is the better medium to long-term model for Grenada? Because if you just buy the homes, then it means you're taking all the money, you're sending it outside of the country. But if the traditional method where we buy, even though it's imported as well, but at least Hubbard's and Purcell and Ramdani are employing Grenadians, and therefore they get paid, and it has a much larger and positive net impact on the economy than if you just send the money to a manufacturer overseas. So we have to factor that in as well. But we also have to factor in the needs of people, particularly in circumstances where you need emergency housing and you need it immediately, as in the case of Carriacou and Petit Martin, where people are without shelter. So and then with the challenge of aggregates not being available in Carriacou and Petit Martin and getting it up there. So in that sense, when we do the analysis, it may be that doing more prefab homes may be better suited for Carriacou and Petit Martin because of all of the challenges we have
at this point, yes,
at this point, as compared, say, with Grenada. So those are some of the things we are in the process of trying to in a sense, figure out and get the information from, so that we can do a sober and proper assessment and then make a determination, I think, certainly coming out of August, as to what would be our policy going forward on housing.
Okay. Healthcare. That was a big one.
Yes.
So, Project Polaris, where are we with that?
Well, I would say check on Project Polaris. As you're aware, we quickly acquired the site to make sure that it didn't slip from our grasp, and that has been done. We've put together the delivery team led by Andrea St. Bernard and Damian Dolan. They've been doing a lot of work. We're at the point where we've retained a site planner, because this is a huge site. The hospital is only part of it, and we want to be able to develop the entire site into a medical village. So it's very important to ensure that that is done properly, so that we know, okay, this is hospital, this is infrastructure, and then this is hotel site, this is retirement home, this is add-ons in terms of clinical services and so on. So that is critical. So we're in the process of
what we want to put would impact on the design naturally.
Yes.
What do we want to put? What are the services that are going to be present?
No, well, I can't. Facility? Yeah, but I mean, it's not that simple, right? And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to get into an area that I'm not familiar with. So I'll answer this in this way by saying that's part of the reason why we have a number of things. The clinical services, which I assume is what you're talking about when you say what do we want to put, has to be able to meet the needs of the Grenadian population first and foremost, right? But I think also it has to give the hospital the opportunity to earn revenue, in a manner that can sustain the hospital. So
allow Grenadians to access.
And allow Grenadians to access it, yes, because to some extent you will have to have some cross-subsidization,
right?
And so that is critical.
So the question really is, what do you envision being the profit center of the facility that would allow access to the ordinary Grenadian?
Right. Well, I think for us, that's where medical tourism comes in critically, because we think that has to be part of the profit center model. I would also say, to some extent, offering international services that are probably more difficult to obtain in some of the more heavily regulated and complex and costly developed world centers. So things like stem cell research and so on are significantly regulated, or in some cases just outright banned in some of the more developed countries. I think we are going to have to look at these models to see whether, even if it's not part of the central hospital services, but at what I call the add-on profit centers around the hospital can be used. The other thing that I think is critical for us is, in the developed world, and that's the fact, the ethnic mix is focused largely on Caucasians. There has been significant, what I call, under-research in terms of disease, illness, public health challenges faced by the developing world, faced by the black world, faced by the brown world. Right, and I think there's an opportunity for us, since we are going new, to make sure that we can also focus on how we can collaborate on the research and development side to be able to address some of those needs. So health, wellness, tourism, medical tourism, I would certainly say elective surgeries that are lucrative, and you could focus on, at the end of the day, we've been working with Deloitte to actually develop business models to look at some of those issues. I would say elective vanity surgeries is certainly, I think, a potential for significant
And the
profit.
question is whether or not we have missed the boat on that, because we go to Mexico, you go to Brazil, some people are flying across the pond in order to get those.
I know, but I don't think we have. I don't think we have. I think, unfortunately, the vanity of man knows no end, and I don't think it's going to stop suddenly. And as I said, the African continent, I think, is also, and the Middle East, also areas that we I think need to look at. You still have, so I think there are significant opportunities.
How, if we're saying that we are still looking, when will building?
No. So I think, in a sense, you interrupted some of the things I wanted to say about Project Polaris in terms of where we are. So I was just saying, site has been acquired. We're in the process of dealing with the site planner. As you're aware, we've signed a collaboration and licensing agreement with Mount Sinai, so that they can help us with the process of the long-term positioning, I would put it this way, of the hospital, to make sure that we can do the things that we need to make this a success. We've also signed with them an agreement to assist with improving the quality of healthcare delivery at the current hospital, and to begin to change the culture there, because it's absolutely vital that as we ultimately transition, the culture starts to change now. And there are things that right now, as low-hanging fruits, that are immediate and obvious. I'll give an example: the records room. If you see the before and after of the records room at the hospital, you already see the significant difference that it's been made. At the last town hall, we had a local doctor openly talking about the collaboration in terms of improving the healthcare, and how that has already begun to improve the quality of care and the experience of persons there, and the enthusiasm of our local team, because this is largely, in a sense, doctor to doctor, management to management at that level to begin the improvements. And I'll give an example: patient ID bans. Right, because if you go to any US hospital, you'd probably see how much they emphasize just to make sure that you do not make mistakes, because the worst thing is to give the wrong patient the wrong medicine or the wrong whatever, what have you. So simple things like making sure you can identify who your patient is, because the patient may be unconscious, the patient may not be able to speak, and so when a nurse or someone is interacting with the patient, you need to know who the person is, right? So simple things like that, hand washing standards, right? But this is not just unique. It may sound so, but this is a challenge in hospitals worldwide. I've actually seen in the US where, when hospitals are able to enforce the hand washing protocols, how infections and cross infections reduce substantially. So simple things like this. So that is ongoing. On the financing side, the team has been working very hard with pursuing securing the financing, and we've been looking at all of the scenarios. The Minister of Finance just signed in Vienna a cooperation agreement with the OPEC fund that should allow us to get concessional financing at, I think, 1.375 interest rate. If I'm not mistaken, I think the amount is somewhere in the region of 90 million, I think 30 million a year. We are looking to earmark that as to use for funding for the hospital. We've been in significant negotiations with what I will call the Arab funding agencies, including the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, UAE, to also potentially look at funding. We've asked the Saudis to repurpose the $100 million US that was signed to the hospital project. The team is expected to visit at the end of July as part of their own assessment as to whether to agree and so on. So we're making some significant strides towards trying to secure the financing. The cabinet has approved an initial $25 million US as part of our own equity injection into the project, and all of the costs associated with the project thus far we are bearing it, because we are committed to doing this, because it's not just about healthcare. I think it's about creating an industry around the healthcare sector that could in a sense transform the southern eastern part of Grenada in very much the same way as you has over the years transformed the southern tip of Grenada, while at the same time delivering our healthcare not just to Grenada, but we think it will be a critical hub for the OECS and wider region as well.
Okay. There is the belief that once the government is able to turn sod on this new hospital project, we could expect the bell to ring for the next election. So is that 2026?
No, we are expecting hopefully to have a sod turning ceremony in 2026 for the hospital. But I mean, I've said this, and I'm going to say it again. I'm not a fan of this cloak and dagger type politics, and you have to, hold your bed in your pocket and only, people be elected to serve 5 terms, 5 years. Maybe there's a Freudian slip by saying 5 terms.
I took note of that.
And I don't believe in playing games. We are here to work. We are here to serve. I have no difficulty even with a fixed date for elections. In the US, you have a fixed date. For example, in Guyana, the elections have been announced months in advance. It's in September. At the end of the day, I don't think, if you are working for the people and you're the incumbent, ultimately we know the elections is going to be a referendum on the relationship and on the performance of the government. That's the truth. And if the public is unhappy in large enough quantities, we know what the consequences are going to be. If they're satisfied, then I think we also know what the consequences are going to be. And note I said both performance and relationship, because we understand the nature of our parliamentary democracy, that you could be the most fantastic performing minister. You could work hard on behalf of people, but in our Caribbean society, people want a relationship with you, particularly as the MP. And obviously, we have to factor that in terms of our engagements with our population. But I think, I obviously was a tiny dot during the revolution, but I will certainly say in my lifetime, I would count that as 1984. And other ones, I don't know of any administration that has spent as much time just directly engaging with our citizens in every shape, form, and format, from community meetings, town halls, direct engagement, social media, and has been as accessible and available as this administration has been. So from that perspective, I think we're also changing the landscape about how we govern and the interaction between the persons who are elected and the citizens of the country.
Okay. Prime Minister, it's time for a final break. So we'll take this break. We'll come back. We chat a couple of things more on healthcare and some of the other priority areas of government. We'll be right back.
Are you longing to taste authentic, flavorful dishes from Thailand? Then look no further. Konthai, the newest restaurant located at the back of Galleria Mall top floor, is the place to satisfy your taste buds for Thai dishes that are well seasoned with fresh local spices. They offer a great selection of sumptuous dishes that will tantalize your taste buds. Visit Konthai today, because the food is good, the ambiance is great, and the staff friendly. Available on Caribites and Yogo Grenada. For more information, call 456-0074 or visit konthaigrenada.com or stop by the new Galleria Mall, Grandin St. George. I'll meet you there.
Need to check your bill balance? Use the Grenlec mobile app. Open the Grenlec mobile app and tap the icon labeled Balances at the bottom of the screen. view your bill details, including your current bill balance, the due date by which you must settle your bill, the amount and date of the last payment you made. It's quick, easy, and available 24/7. Convenience at your fingertips.
Attention all divers, snorkelers, and underwater enthusiasts. Effective May 15th, 2025, all visitors to the renowned Mullinair Underwater Sculpture Park will be required to pay a small fee of US $3.50 or EC $10 per person. These fees are essential to support the ongoing maintenance and repairs of the sculptures, as well as the development of new features to ensure the park remains a world-class attraction. Payment can be made through the Grenada Tourism Authority's online payment portal, available on the Pure Grenada website, www.puregrenada.com. We thank you for your support in enhancing this extraordinary underwater product. This announcement is brought to you by the Grenada Tourism Authority and the Ministry of Tourism, dedicated to protecting and conserving Grenada's resources for the enjoyment of all.
Welcome back. We have Prime Minister Mitchell with us. Prime Minister, I want to stick with healthcare a little bit. National health insurance. It's over a decade and still nothing. Some may even say that we're further back now because of the cancellation of the last contract. Where are we with this?
No, I don't think we're further back now. And I could probably answer by saying, we've dealt with the things that were long outstanding, like the 40-year pension. So we're going down, by the decades. I don't think we're further back. I think we got into office, we met a situation where national health insurance was in abeyance. Mm-hmm. The JIPA arrangement predated us. JIPA had indicated that things got sidetracked partly because of COVID and the government's then focus on wanting assistance with COVID. And they made a case for resuming with them. We took a while because we wanted to hear them out, we wanted to look at the options, and I would say we allowed them to convince us to give them a second bite of the cherry, so to speak, because we had our reservations. Mm-hmm. And we gave them the opportunity. But I think it became clear to us as time went on that frankly we were not on the same page, and that I would put it in one line, that what they were proposing was overly complicated, overly sophisticated, and frankly difficult to grasp. And when it comes to public policy, I have to be able to explain it to the average man, mm-hmm. so that he understands. And if I'm not able to do so, and if the people we are paying money are not able to give me in a form that I'm able to explain to the persons, then something is wrong. And I don't care how sophisticated you tell me it has to make sense to the average person. So we recognized that we could not proceed, and it was not cheap. So we also had to factor that in. And it became clear as well, I think, that when we look at the work that was done by the University of the West Indies and so on, that it was not necessarily in sync with what JIPA was proposing. And there were some other issues. Now from our perspective, JIPA should be our consultant, mm-hmm. guiding us as to how you set up the NHI. But I think what became clear as well is that, in a sense, it's not just being the consultant, it's also wanting to be the supplier.
Okay.
Right, in the long run, by the technologies and all of that kind of stuff, while saying there are options, but the way in which the whole thing was conceived was almost an underlying assumption that they will end up being the supplier, end up managing the system and all of that, which is not the same thing, because ultimately if there's a conflict between what you as our consultants is proposing and you as a supplier may end up doing, who's going to tell us that it's not in our best interest? So at the end, we took the decision that it was not advancing us in the manner in which we wanted to go. So we've re-engaged Professor, the Minister of Health and his team are looking at it, and we expect we would put together a team that will help us champion this. And it's critical because as we go forward with Project Polaris as well, this is the key part of the financing, particularly from a domestic, local level as well. And I mean, I think everyone accepts conceptually you insure your car, you insure your home, why are you not insuring your health? And at the end of the day, and you see it all around, I just had the sad news this afternoon for a young man from St. Andrew who's been quite a supporter who died to, it appears, organ failure, right? And the challenge here again is that significant fundraising activities and so on was being made to help, but this is the challenge: no health insurance, right? And so we have to appreciate that if we are prepared to insure material things, home and car and what have you, the single most important thing is your health, and therefore the opportunity exists for us to pursue a national health insurance, and we should certainly do it, at least to be able to give us a flooring in terms of some of the basic financing you would expect to be associated with.
We know it's the right thing to do. We've been saying it's the right thing to do for over 10 years. If we are to project as to an implementation date, is it next 2 years?
Well, to be safe, I would probably say 2 to 3 years, partly to, as much as possible, coincide with the commissioning of the new hospital, because you certainly want, when that is up and running, that the health insurance is at least commencing at the same time.
HR is also an important factor for healthcare, and we're short on physicians. What is the strategy to get a return of service from our physicians, primarily those from the graduates of St. George's University? Those from Cuba and other places, I believe they're back here by and large, but the SU graduates are not.
Right, so I think there's the soft and the hard approach. I think the hard approach is that we absolutely have to enforce the bond. It's extremely expensive to educate medical professionals, and while I obviously want a medical professional to benefit from his education, if it is coming at taxpayers' expense and a scholarship, then you have an absolute obligation to fulfill your commitment. So I think on the hard basis, it is something the Attorney General's office and the Minister of Education is looking at to see how we can compel the enforcement either by people coming back or frankly paying back. Right. Having said that, on the soft approach, we want to believe that Grenadians who are educated at taxpayers' expense would feel a sense of duty and patriotism to want to serve. And serve within a reasonable time or for a reasonable period, and continue serving even after they've fulfilled their bond commitments and so on. So also on the soft side, I think engaging the medical professionals in the diaspora is something we've been very keen on, and in fact there has been quite significant traction. Quite a number of them are actually involved in providing for free technical and consulting support to the Project Polaris team on some of the issues. I know some of them have also been doing a lot of work on things like the issues with dialysis and so on. So and obviously there are many Grenadians who come back as part of missions who volunteer their time and effort without seeking any form of compensation and so on. So there's also part of that. But there's no question that I think we have to get to the point where and it's not a straightforward issue, because obviously one of the challenges is the lack of specialities or specialists, doctors, and we have to get to the point where that also happens. So it means, for example, if you got the MD and then you don't want to specialize, it means further deferral of your bond, and so there's a fine line between that, and then you probably don't want to lose the opportunity. So I think some discussions on those instances and a policy has to be sorted. In fact, recently I think the Ministry of Education was grappling with a request for a further deferral, I think after a second one, to pursue. But
I think it's honorable that there is still engagement and requests for deferral, which means that there's respect to the system that funded the education.
Yes.
I think the challenge is when people just disappear, and you never hear from them.
Yes, but I mean, people have to understand that, and that's why enforcement, this is a legal obligation. This is not, you're not doing the state a favor. The state has paid for your education, and if you went and borrowed the loan from a bank, the bank can ask you whether you have to pay them back. You have to pay it back. So we have to get to the point where people respect the state and respect that it's taxpayers' money who've educated them, and that you have a legal obligation to pay or to serve. Again, as I said, because we deal with human beings, and because we also appreciate that outside of the payment, studying for a medical degree is not an easy thing. And therefore, we also have to appreciate the sacrifices people make to actually pursue.
You mentioned early on in some of the challenges as you expanded an attempt to diversify the educational system, music rooms, engaging the young men, and some of the challenges that we face in terms of the drug abuse, drug addiction, gambling, etc. Carlton Home. Year one, there was a budgetary allocation. I don't recall if there was an allocation in this last budget, but we still don't have a Carlton Home. How are we going to address addiction in general, whether it is substance abuse or the explosion really of blast shops all around the country? And some believe there's now a serious gambling problem.
Well, there is a serious gambling problem. That's a fact. And I actually do think the expansion of the blast shops around the island has been a terrible mistake. But it is something that we will have to address in a constructive manner, because again, I appreciate that for someone who has a black shop, there's an opportunity to earn revenue, but we have to mitigate. Gambling is what I call a demerit good. Right, and so we have to mitigate it, we have to regulate it, and we have to make sure that we address the addiction risk associated with it. I'm not going to say prohibit it, because it doesn't make sense, right? You can't prohibit human behaviors as the only means of addressing the issues, but that's a challenge. But I want to go to the Carlton home and point it, and I'll probably use this as an opportunity for you to invite the Minister for Mental Health and Religious Affairs, as well as since she also has a portfolio of Minister of Youth and Sports, onto your program, so she can give you a full update of where we are with Carlton Home. But the site in Maribo has been identified. I think surveying and so on is taking place, perhaps even fencing of the site. And obviously the designs for the home are going to be undertaken, because there is some funding available from the private sectors, matching funding to support this. We are committed to getting this. This is going to get done. You know, I think it's only 36 months. And as I said, we've had to deal with a lot of long-term legacy issues, from police pay and grade 1994 to pensions beyond, since 1983 and that sort of thing. So there's been a lot. We're trying to deal with the oldest stuff. We're trying to deal with land regularization for persons who've been on sites for beyond 10 years and so on. But we recognize the importance of this issue and the need to have a rehabilitation center. And so the minister and our team will certainly work as expeditiously as they can to get us there. But again, it's construction, and with all of what's going on, you appreciate the challenges of capacity when it comes to those issues.
The next question is just purely coincidence that it follows, but one of the other things that you mentioned is the legalization of cannabis, and also the movement towards research, production, sale. We're end of June. Can we expect an announcement?
I don't know, maybe you're clairvoyant, but we actually spent a significant part of the cabinet discussions today with the legal drafters and the cabinet subcommittee cannabis secretariat addressing the first draft of the legislation to depenalize small possessions, quantities of marijuana, as well as to begin the process to moving to medicinal, industrial, commercial use of marijuana. We are hoping to be able to take the bill to Parliament in July. I was actually pushing to see if I could have gotten it done in June, but we obviously have to get the drafting right. We have to make sure we understand what our international obligations are, which is one of the major things that we spent exploring, so that we understand what, if any, impediments externally we may be party to. But we are committed to this. We also obviously have to carve out the space for the Rastafarian community to use their hub for their sacramental and religious purposes, and also at the same time providing that we have sufficient safeguards in place to ensure that there's no public smoking of marijuana still, that there's no smoking around educational institutions and so on, that we limit the quantities one can have for personal use, because we want to ensure that there is no, what I would call, illicit trafficking, because to go to a medicinal, industrial, commercial use, there still will have to be a licensing and permitting regime, and you still have controls in place and so on, because as I said, you still have international obligations.
And you still don't know what the grades are, etc., to make sure that that's safe.
And there's still reporting requirements. So we also want to be able to expunge the records of persons who would have had past convictions for small quantities of marijuana, especially for personal use. So we anticipate that we'll probably have a further sit down next Monday to finish trash out this and improve the second or third draft of the bill. Then I anticipate we will have circulate the draft to the public for review, for comments. The Secretariat has been engaging and consulting with people throughout the last 12 to 18 months. The chairman is Mr. Anselm Clouden of Council, who I know has been making incessant pleas for us to expeditiously move with this matter. As he said today, the urgent necessity of now So we do appreciate the work that the committee has been doing, and so we are relatively optimistic that we can have a potential debate in Parliament in July.
Okay.
If not July, if there's a recess in August because of the summer period, then certainly September.
Okay. Just some quick questions as we come to a close. CBI, we saw for the first quarter there was a drop. Where do we see our funding going? One, in terms of would there be a rebound if we are to reposition our product? What geographical space are we looking at? And were we mistaken, or whether it was deliberate or otherwise, tying a lot of the promotions to the E2 visa in the U.S., given what the circumstances are now?
No, I think first of all, CBI revenues have always been relatively steady. We had a 2-year blip, what I call the Russian rush,
right,
because of the Russian-Ukraine war, and then initially the fact that our government, the past administration, had said they would not process Russians, along with other OECS territories, and then they started secretly processing Russians, and then we got into office, we found that out, and so we were faced with the situation where we had a large backlog of Russian applications. We then subsequently agreed that we would stop, but we needed to clear the backlog, and we couldn't rush it because we did not want to compromise the integrity of the system. So we always knew that this was an exceptional 2 years, and that we would go back down to what I call more normalized applications from previous years, and that's really what has happened. We have never tied our budget, so to speak, largely to CBI revenues. I think even with the Russian rush, I think it only represented about 12% of total government revenues. So the budgeting has always really been based on what I call our normal revenue streams, and so to that extent, obviously, we do want the CBI revenues to continue to grow, but it's not a situation where we've tied our budgeting process to that. I think these industries are always going to face headwinds because of the fact that it is foreign direct investment, not tied to loans, which leads to the kind of vicious cycle of dependency and shocks. And they've offered a bit of a financial cushion to many of the regions, almost to the point where some countries have become heavily dependent on them, like St. Kitts. And so we do appreciate that they're on sometimes unspoken perspectives on our own development that impacts those things. So we recognize that we have to constantly negotiate and be nimble with addressing concerns that people have. But we've always been satisfied that we run a robust, transparent system. We've never hid anything from our partners. We always invite them to come in and do so. And we think in doing so, we have, I think, been able to educate them a lot and to make sure that some of the unfortunate, sometimes ill-founded and just straight out false publications, I can't even call them media reports, because sometimes they just come from bad actors, sometimes they come from opposition politicians. When in opposition, they're saying all kinds of stuff about the program. You get in the government, you say stuff. And I'm sure people may even say this about the NDC administration. I never said anything about it, but I'm saying, in years gone by. So we just have to make sure, like any other industry that we have, that we try and engage in international best practices for the long-term survivability of the practice. The fact is, investment migration is always going to happen. You look at the state of the world today, people who work hard and save a little money, scratching their head about where to go to be safe. If it's not from war, then it's from crazy politicians. So there's always instability. So people are always going to be looking for second options and for mobility. And obviously, we want to continue maintaining the Caribbean as a zone of peace. And so we always saying the Caribbean is a fantastic place to come. And Grenada happens to be in the Caribbean. There's tolerance, religious and ethnic diversity. We speak English, hardworking people, well-educated population. So these are opportunities, and we're offering to share with persons in exchange for investment. But I'm sure over time the programs could change into all kinds of things, including investment migration programs based on skills, for example, because we have significant shortage of skills in various areas, and we may be looking to do so. The US and Canada and Europe, that's what they're doing.
Canada in particular.
They take all up, but think about the brain drain that we suffer. All our talented people who are educated by us go to North America, right? They offer them incentives, they study up there and they keep them.
Right.
All of the doctors we've educated, they at taxpayers' expenses, they're in the United States, building the United States. Yes, some may engage in remittances and so on, but we then have the shortage of skills here.
Right.
So we have to understand this is what migration is. And it could be financial investment, it could be know-how, it could be skills. After the collapse of after the defeat of Nazi Germany, the rise of Stalin and what have you, most of America benefited from the Russian nuclear scientists and so on went to America. So this is part and parcel of what happens. After the fall of the Shah in Iran, many Iranians migrated to the United States. So we also have to understand that and sometimes not let people fool us into thinking attempts by us to become more financially independent is bad because of some self-imposed moralization about what is or isn't sovereignty or what is or isn't citizenship and so on. Everyone who lives in Grenada is a descendant of a migrant. The original population of if you can call it that, the Amerindians were exterminated by the Europeans, so everyone else who's here has come here or their ancestors came here.
Okay. MNIB.
Yes.
When are we going to see some construct that replaces that?
Right, so this has been delayed a little. Where we are is in fact entreating with private sector potential investors. The committee is continuing that process because we have to find a private sector partner. I'm not in a position to give an immediate response as to where exactly we are with that, and I could probably take a note of that so that we can share it with the public once I have the update from the committee.
Okay, no problem. Government buildings.
Yes.
Lots of government buildings, lots of derelict government buildings. We're renting for the Prime Minister, we're renting for the Governor General. Even the Ministry of Finance now is renting because Inland Revenue is now transferred to the South. Our sub-office in the South is one thing. When are we going to see some movement on the restoration of our own buildings so that we get to keep those monies in the coffers and you get the flexibility to do a lot of the things that you would want to do?
Yeah. Well, we inherited, unfortunately, a situation where there was no policy on maintenance and no maintenance program largely in place for almost all government buildings, all and sundry, from the Houses of Parliament to the Prime Minister's residence. Well, the Governor General building, it's 2004.
Yeah, correct.
Right? 21 years
21
now.
years.
An entire generation, a full Grenadian adult. Right? The building hasn't been rebuilt. So this is the challenge we face, and it's all happening, unfortunately, at the same time. The state of the police, central government, ministerial complex, the Ministry of Education. Right now, the Ministry of Education is under renovation. The entire staff had to move because of issues there. So, as you said, the financial complex. So, it's an enormous task. It's Herculean, and it literally will have to be one at a time. And again, it's exacerbated by the shortage of labor, by the hurricane situation. So, what we are seeking to do ultimately is to get to the point where we can have preventative maintenance. Well, in some cases you need deep renovation and maintenance work, for example, on the financial complex.
Right.
The Ministry of Education, we've been working on the ministerial complex since we've been in office, and we're getting there, but it's slow going because you have to work with staff there, and then we've had some challenges where sometimes when you're about to start the work, rain, for example, recently fell and the deluge caused further flooding and so on, further setting back the work. What we're hoping we can get to is a point where we can have a systematic rollout and a major. We're going to have contractors who do preventative maintenance rather than just simply not maintaining the buildings and then 10 years.
I mean, that's one thing, because looking at the budget line, it very nearly where you never see maintenance. So it was never catered for, and then didn't happen. And here we are.
Yes. So that is part of what we have to be able to counteract, is first ensuring we have the preventative maintenance, which will at least be able to allow us to plan and predict when buildings are going to be required for a major overhaul. We also have to consolidate our approach. I mean, when the ministerial complex was built, the whole idea then obviously was to try and centralize government buildings as much as possible in one place. That has obviously kind of not worked or not worked as well as it can, partly because the government seems to be getting larger and larger, which is also an issue that we need to address. More government isn't always better. And it's part of the challenge of seeing the government is involved in almost every facet of people's life. But you have to pull some of that back because you want to make the citizens independent and successful independent and successful of the government.
Right.
Because that's a hallmark that the private sector is growing, the economy is growing. But the more social safety nets you have, it means the country is getting poor.
Right.
You know, so those are some of the issues that we have to be able to address. We need to drive more efficiencies. Digitizing the government means you can have access to government's resources and services online. So again, less need for physical buildings and some of those things. So it will, in my estimation, take us 5 to 7 years to get us to where we need to be. Because, for example, the financial complex now has to be completely renovated. You're talking about maybe at least a 3 year.
Okay.
A 2 to 3 year.
Let me ask you this, because I know this was something that was raised. As government contracts with the private sector, are we making sure that the private sector individuals or companies that we contract with are honorable to their government obligations? So, you know, as your...
No, absolutely. We are doing so. The team at the Ministry of Finance don't joke about the fact that you need to be registered for taxes, that you need to be up to date, even in terms of the procurement process. If you're in the government taxes and so on, the likelihood that you get a government contract is pretty slim. So you need to be up to date with your taxes, you need to have your TIN numbers, even for the small contractors. I mean, sometimes they're frustrated because they think, why? But again, at the end of the day, you're getting government contracts is also to allow you not to be intimidated by the formal business sector, if I may put it this way, and to begin that growth process so that you understand you can't do business without being registered for tax, without being registered for NIS, without having a bank account. These are all part and parcel of giving you the foundational tools and infrastructure to actually get a proper business that hopefully can grow as well, because we also want the businesses to go from micro to small to medium and to large eventually. So that is something that the team at the Ministry of Finance is quite keen on enforcing as well.
Okay. My final question for you. This past weekend was very eventful. We saw the U.S. stepping in, the bombing of Iraq. Iraq, of course, has Iran, with Iran responding. What is your outlook, and how do you see this impacting us Grenada, us Caribbean?
I mean, I would say first on a human level, it's not just Iran, and the U.S. It's the entire situation in the Middle East. This 75-year struggle between the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. The untold suffering that is just being played out on TV and being normalized, the fact that the enormous conflicts that are going on in places like Sudan and the immeasurable suffering is just being completely ignored. So I'm speaking as a black man, in the totem pole, black conflicts and suffering doesn't matter to people. So I'm not, this may sound ironic, I'm not even sure I want to talk about the US and Iran when I know what's going on in Sudan and some of the African countries, because it doesn't even make the news, right? So, if I was a mean, lacking empathy person, I would say, well, whatever is going on in the Middle East is none of our business, but it is, because it has enormous economic consequences, the instability, the recklessness of it all. But as I said, it's all men sending young people to war and fueling, centuries and decades old prejudices rather than being mature and sensible about sitting down and talking through and using diplomacy to negotiate better outcomes for future generations of people, right? So how does talking and fueling this double standard about who should and who shouldn't have nuclear weapons put anybody in a state where you're going to make the world safer? It's not going to, because if you look at history, all of the smaller countries that have given up their nuclear weapons have been destroyed. That is what is fueling the ambition for nuclear weapons, right? So whether it's Libya, whether it's Ukraine, right, there are examples of it. So what you find is you encourage these countries, or more importantly, as long as it is a brown or a black country, they don't want you to have nuclear weapons, right? South Africa was enriching uranium. It was permissible when it was being ruled by the Afrikaners. But once it was clear that it was going to become a country that is going to be ruled by a black man, what was the approach? Get them to give it up. Right? So you have this situation where, unfortunately, from a geopolitical military point of view, it is an effective deterrent to being attacked. Right? That's why it's only the big boys who want to have it.
Right.
Right? Doesn't Israel have nuclear weapons? And it's probably the smallest state in the Middle East. So why should they have and Iran should have? So you see the hypocrisy of it all. So it's just, I'm speaking just from a human level, it's sad. and I think for us as small island developing states, as black people, as developing countries, we have to continue encouraging things like the rule of law. As much as it is sometimes against smaller countries and the developing world, still encourage a rules-based system, still encourage diplomacy, advocacy, insisting on people doing what's right, insisting on the respect for the sovereignty of nations, and hope that we walk back from the brink of this craziness. Now, people always feel that things will get better, but it doesn't. And if we are not vigilant, and if we don't invest in peace and invest in diplomacy, it's almost natural for man to behave just like base animals. So our fight is to constantly prevent us from becoming base animals, right? And to constantly try and work on becoming civil to each other, and to maintain our civilization. And when you look at it, in my mind, in the last 5 years, whether it's Russia and Ukraine, whether it's Israel, Palestine, Israel, Iran, US, Iran. You look at Libya, you look at Iraq. I mean, these countries have been destroyed. What people don't know, for example, is all of the arms that were in Libya, right, after the fall of Gaddafi, ended up in Africa, all the Boko Haram and all these people and so on. This is where a lot of the stuff came from. So sometimes you don't even understand the consequences of what these things mean to the countries, and so it just breeds insecurity, breeds criminality, breeds war, destruction, the migration issues and so on. So as much as the UN talks about all of these lofty goals and so on, in many instances, large parts of the world and millions of people are still suffering from the effects of war and destitution and displacement and so on that war brings, and it's just sad. So we have to constantly fight that urge to allow people to pull us into this war conflicts and these conflicts, and continue advocating for peace. And we have our own challenges. We've had the Venezuela-Guyana situation. We know what has happened to Cuba. We know the U.S.-Venezuela challenge. So our role really in Grenada and the OECS and the CARICOM is to continue advocating, continue using our own, I think, experience with tolerance, with multi-ethnic, multiracial groups living peacefully side by side, tolerating each other, speaking through our differences, and use the skill sets that we have to help the rest of the world, including them big boys, to understand that in the long run, all of them are saying it, all of them are saying at the end of the day, it is still a diplomatic and political solution that is going to move it. Correct. They all say that, but they put in all the effort into war. Right? They're putting all the effort into war, and then they turn around and say it's a political and diplomatic solution. So what does that tell you? Right? The other things that play, they won the war. People profit from war. Right? So this is really what this is. It's profiteering at the expense of human suffering.
All right. 3 years behind you, yes. 2 years in front of you. Tell the Grenadian population as we close what they can expect in the next 2 years.
Well, no, I think we can certainly expect us to continue fighting and working on behalf of the government, of the people of Grenada and the citizens of Grenada in very much the same way that we've continued. I don't think the energy has waned. If ever we may expect, particularly in the next 2 years, that it might be upped a little. We are committed to. It's important to do, I guess, low-hanging fruits, but it's also important to do structural, transformative stuff that will benefit the nation in the long run. Right. So issues like the healthcare, issues that ultimately has a more medium to long-term approach. The truth is there's no point in pretending it can be solved immediately. What we really want to do is be able to measure after the 5 years. Where were we when we started? Where will we become? Right? And you can't get that kind of success if you're just reactive and all over the place. So sometimes it may appear as if nothing is happening, and that's because you have to do a lot of the foundational and the background work. The same with things like education. So our goal obviously is to focus on some of the more structural, medium to long-term things that needs to be done. The changes that we need to bring about in the education sector, the changes we need to bring about in the healthcare sector, some of the changes we need to deal with in terms of our capacity to deal with the infrastructure challenges we have, the roads and so on. Our transportation sector, a major issue that needs to be addressed if we are going to, frankly, save the way of life in Grenada and not end up where you're just in traffic all day. So some of those issues we need to be able to address. But obviously, in terms of some of the immediate needs of persons, housing, encouraging growth within the private sector so that more people can be employed, ensuring that we can offer offer short-term skills training courses and so on that could lead to immediate employment in areas where there's great demand and so on. We will certainly be looking to continue those, empowering our creatives and further supporting them and so on, again, so you could have employment. Those are some of the issues we will certainly look as continuing our engagements or town hall meetings or village meetings, listening to our people and trying to fashion policy that will respond to them. Those will continue. Those areas of the manifesto that we don't have yet checked or completed, we will obviously continue working and pursuing them. And for us, we also want to maintain that sense of pride and nationalism in the country and getting people involved. And make sure that we forever banish that culture of intimidation and victimization and manipulation that we think had sort of come to represent competitive politics. We want people to be able to criticize us, because in that criticism you may find pearls of wisdom that will help improve your ability to govern, improve the policy making that you need to make. And at the end of the day, we brothers and sisters. I mean, in one way, shape, or form, people always say everybody in Grenada is related, and you don't want this the refrain from Bob Marley that always plays over in my head over and over is, would you want the system make you hate your brother, man? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, dread, no. I mean, I know you're balling, but and I think this is important. We should not let politics get us to the point where you hate your brother for what? Because he benefits from a party supporting or whatever, and then so we have to move past that and focus more on the right policy that would benefit the majority. Not everyone will always benefit, but the right healthcare policy, the right education policy, the right infrastructure policy, so that the country and all of us come up with the rising tide, rather than just all of the petty pettiness that sometimes comes to characterize or politics. And we think this is important from a value-based system. We think this is important to make sure we can change the politics so that future generations of Grenadians will see a career in public service, even if it's in the form of politics, as something attractive and desirable to do.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Mitchell, for joining us and sharing. It was an absolute pleasure having you, and you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending the last 90-plus minutes with us as we spoke to Prime Minister Mitchell, reflecting on the last 3 years in office. Again, it is you that make the show, so thank you for being a part of it, and I look forward to being with you in the next 6 days, 22 and a half hours. Have a good evening. Take good care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.